Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today it is time for part 2 of my post-Countdown Cup power rankings. If you didn't check out part 1, you can watch it by going to the link in the description or in the cards, or at the end of this video you'll be able to find it there. But in that video I went over teams 20 through 11, and in this part I'll be going over teams 10 to 1, the top 10 teams I have in the Overwatch League following the Countdown Cup. So if you didn't see the part 1 and you want to know where I have the teams, check there, but you'll also see my full list here at the end of this video. But if you want more reasonings and explanations, go check out that part at the end. But let's jump into it. Let's go and let's start with this video. Real quick, of course, as always, these are my thoughts, these are my opinions, so if you disagree, agree, whatever it is, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. Have a nice discussion about it. Hopefully a good discussion. Yeah, but without any delay, let's jump into the list. At number 10, I have the Washington Justice. Now, this is a team that I have been just back and forth on all season. This is the time of the season, though, that I feel the least confident in them. Yes, I still have them as a top 10 team, which says quite a lot. But a lot of that is based on just their talent. We've seen them find success against some really good teams like the LA Gladiators. And we've seen them find success against the Dallas Fuel. We've also seen them struggle against some not as good teams. They struggled against Paris, though they did beat them the most recent time they played. They do have a loss to Paris as well. They struggled against Boston. They have not been able to kind of reach those highs, but they've been especially weak when there were hero pools in play. This time around, there are no hero pools in play. So in theory, things should be a little bit better for them. They'll have a game against the Paris Eternal this weekend. Maybe they come up big. I don't know why they picked the Paris Eternal. I feel like that was the wrong pick to make. I think you should have chosen the Boston Uprising, but maybe that's just me. I feel like this is a good Justice team that is just struggling to find an identity, but I still feel like this is a team that has what it takes to be a playoff team. They could easily, I think, make the playoff and be a very real threat to any of the teams. That includes the likes of the Shanghai Dragons and the Dallas Fuel and the LA Gladiators and the Chengdu Hunters. You know, these teams that have been at the top recently, you know, the Shock, the Reign. These are teams that I think that the Washington Justice are potential threats to. But we just haven't seen the level of consistency from them that we need to see from a team that, in my opinion, would be higher on this power rankings list. So for me, I have them here at number 10. At number 9, I have the Philadelphia Fusion. I think the Philadelphia Fusion potentially are better than this 9 spot. They've struggled quite a bit. We've seen them lose some games here and there against some teams maybe they shouldn't, but they look to be on the rise. They look much better now than they did look, the past couple of tournaments. They didn't look very strong in the June Joust or the Summer Showdown, but they really have started to turn things around. They had a very strong Countdown Cup performance before falling flat against the Seoul Dynasty. But the main reason why I have them here at number 9 is I wanted to have my top 8 teams in this power rankings be the teams that I think will be playing in the playoffs in a few weeks. And in my opinion, the Philadelphia Fusion are going to be just on the outside. I think they are not going to make the playoffs. A little spoiler for my picks, but I just think that they are good, but I don't think they quite have the spark they need. Maybe some of that is due to the fact that Poco was never able to be with the team for this season, and he got stuck in Europe. Who knows if that's the full main reason why I think this team has underperformed the expectations that we had for them. But I just think they are just on the outside. They've looked a lot better with Funny Astro coming in and with EQO coming in, and I hope that we see a lot more Shockwave going forward. The team has looked better as they've kind of integrated some of these other pieces, but I don't think that the Fusion are going to be playing in the playoffs, despite the fact that we've seen this rapid improvement from them. We've seen this major improvement from them. I just think that the Seoul Dynasty are a better looking team right now. I think that the Seoul Dynasty have more consistency. They've looked better. Yeah, they've struggled in the big tournament type of games, but so have the Fusion. And I just trust the Seoul Dynasty a little bit more in that regard. So I think the Fusion are going to be just on the outside looking in. And for that reason, I have them here in the number 9 spot. At number 8, I have the Houston Outlaws. I have the Outlaws here because they are, in my opinion, the team that I have making the playoffs that I have the least confidence in. The Houston Outlaws started the season very, very well. Throughout the first 2 tournaments, they were 7-1 in just the regular season matches. And in the second half of the season, they were 4-4. They were a 500 team in the second half of the season. So the Outlaws are still good. You know, you kind of expect them to beat the likes of your teams like your Parises, your Bostons, though they did lose games to, they lost the game to Boston. But when they went up against teams like London and Vancouver, they were dominant. And they were even dominant in their most recent series against the Washington Justice. But I have concerns about the Outlaws. When we saw them play the Gladiators, they got very, very, very much outclassed. Other than the week 1 matchup they had against the Dallas Fuel have just owned the Houston Outlaws. The Atlanta Reign have owned the Houston Outlaws. The only team that the Outlaws have really had the better of throughout the season that you can, be impressed by is the San Francisco Shock. But other than that, the Outlaws really have struggled against some of these top-level teams. And so, though they looked to be one of the best teams at the beginning of the season, they have fallen off quite badly, I think, and they don't look nearly as strong now as they did when we saw them in the early parts of the season. To me, they are a playoff team. I think they will make the playoffs because we've seen them beat the likes of Washington and Toronto, Boston, Paris. So I think that we can expect the Outlaws to be a playoff team, but they did struggle. They struggled a bit against the Mayhem recently. I don't feel confident about them. So, in my opinion, if there's any team that I think could be eliminated from the playoffs because of just, in an upset fashion, I think Houston Outlaws are the most likely. I don't have the most confidence in them. And even if they do make the playoffs, they're the team that I feel like is going to do the weakest. I just have not seen enough from them recently to have a ton of faith in them. And so for me, they're a good team. They have a lot of talent, but they just don't quite seem like they are an elite level team at this point. So I have them here at number 8. At number 7, I have the Seoul Dynasty, despite the fact that this team did just make a tournament where they, made an appearance in the Countdown Cup. They did not look very good in the Countdown Cup. They won a single map, and that was it. They didn't look very good in a series and in a tournament that I would argue they needed to look good in. It was something that I feel very strongly that the Seoul Dynasty needed to come up big and perform well in, because they needed to try to lock up that number 2 spot in the Eastern region. They needed to kind of prove that they've been consistent all season for a reason, that they are actually truly as good as their record says. And their tournament performance didn't really give me that. But I still think the Seoul Dynasty are a very strong team. I think that Profit and Fitz together are still one of the best DPS duos in the league. I think they're in an elite, they're in an elite category. I don't think many DPS duos in the league rival what Profit and Fitz are in terms of their flexibility and their playmaking abilities. And I think when we see this Seoul Dynasty team click, they are incredibly dangerous. And we saw them last season when the meta favored them in the playoffs really just dominate, making it all the way to the grand finals, and even, pushing San Francisco to 6 maps in that grand finals match, which I don't think many people would have expected. So I think this Dynasty team has a lot of talent on this roster and has some potential. But to me, I just feel like with how close the competition is this season and how good some of these top-level teams are, we haven't seen the level of success from Seoul that I think we need to see, right? We know how good Shanghai is. They look like to be one of the best teams in the league so far. Seoul's played Shanghai like 4 times, I think, this season, and they've lost every single time. Even this past stage when Shanghai wasn't really trying their hardest, Seoul still lost. And it was a close series, and Seoul still lost. So I think Seoul's good. I think they have shown a lot of very strong performances throughout the season, but they just have not given me the confidence in their recent performances for me to think that they are really a very strong contender for the title. And so for me, I have them as 7 overall. At number 6, I have the San Francisco Shock. I honestly think the San Francisco Shock are in a very good position going into the play-in tournament and potentially the playoffs. I think the Shock look to be one of the top teams in the Western region right now. Despite the fact that they never made a tournament, I think that most of the time that they didn't make it, it was a pretty understandable reasoning. You think about the fact that the San Francisco Shock have made, 3 of the tournament regional knockouts so far this season. In their first tournament, the May Melee, they lost to the Dallas Fuel, who then went on to win the May Melee. Then in the June Joust, they lost to Atlanta Reign, who placed 3rd in the June Joust. And then in the Countdown Cup, they went to 5 maps against the LA Gladiators, who then went on to win the Countdown Cup. The Shock have come face to face with, the winners of the tournaments in 2 out of 3 tournament appearances. And that's very, very good. You understand that the Shock have actually competed with teams that have found a lot of success in tournaments. I thought the Shock would make the Countdown Cup. Gladiators impressed me more than I expected them to. And I think that actually was part of the reason why the Shock, to me, have actually kind of risen in my eyes. Their stocks have risen. I think they just look stronger than I had originally thought they did. I think that one of the things that I've been impressed by, despite the fact that we've seen a ton of, in a sense, roster turmoil, Striker retiring, Once returning, Glister having some inconsistencies throughout the season. Their support line has been in kind of shambles. They still have one of the best records in the league. And when you go into playoffs, there's going to be one meta in the playoffs. You can choose to just invest in one support lineup, in one kind of set roster, and I think this team will look a lot better. They experimented a lot throughout the regular season, which is something I didn't really like. But in my opinion, they are at a point right now where they look to be in a position of potentially upsetting expectations. Though they were the number 1 team at the beginning of the preseason, they look to be a team that actually has what it takes potentially to make that playoff run again and compete for a grand finals. This, to me, is the first team on this list that is truly a contender that could truly win the grand finals. I'm a very big believer in this Shock team. I think they are very, very good. And to me, they are the 6th overall team in my power rankings. Moving into my top 5 teams, at number 5, I have the Atlanta Reign. I'm a very big fan of the Atlanta Reign this season, and I've seen some people say they don't really think the Atlanta Reign are truly title contenders, but they still feel like a good team. But I actually think that the Atlanta Reign are title contenders. They just have a bit of an outside chance of it, much like the Shock. Though I feel a little bit better about the Reign because we've seen more consistency from them. We've seen them come up in the big matches this season that we haven't seen from the Shock. The Reign, I think, really favor very specific compositions. They love those Reinhardt-based rush compositions. They love those Orisa-based compositions. I think they are potentially a top 3 Orisa team in the league. I don't necessarily believe they're as good on Reinhardt compositions. I think Orisa compositions truly are their bread and butter and where they excel the most. But I do feel confident in the Atlanta Reign. I think the Atlanta Reign have looked very good so far this season. Their tournament appearances have been very successful. I think especially when you look at what the Atlanta Reign were able to do going 4-0 in the Countdown Cup qualifiers, I think that's a huge, huge thing to consider and a huge thing to kind of look at as a part of why they were kind of successful. And a lot of what they found success with was those Orisa-based compositions. They ran some Reinhardt, which didn't work as well. But I think this team is good, and I think that we'll have Pelican back for this team at full strength. You'll see this team kind of having some time off, be able to prepare. I think they're a dangerous team, really. I think they have what it takes to upset the likes of the Shock and the Fuel and the Gladiators. We've seen them beat the Gladiators a lot this season. It really comes down to, can they beat the Dragons? Can they beat the Chengdu Hunters? We haven't seen them find much success against Eastern region teams, with the exception of the Seoul Dynasty and the New York Excelsior, right? But the top two teams right now we consider in East, they haven't really beaten. So where they can land really comes down to how well they can perform when these other Eastern region teams are competing against them. But I still do think that this Atlanta Reign team is very strong. I think they have a lot of potential to make a deep run, and for me, they are the 5th overall team in my power rankings. At number 4, I have the Chengdu Hunters. Definitely argued putting them higher on this list, but I settled with them at 4 because I just feel as if the teams ahead of them have just shown me a little bit more in terms of big matches, big moments, and it gets a little tough with some of them. But let's talk about Chengdu. Chengdu have looked very, very good. And the thing that they've looked very good at, of course, is Wrecking Ball. But we've also seen a decent amount of strong Winston play come out of Gaga. And we've seen some strong play, especially out of Jinmu and Leave, my MVP for the 2021 season. And we've seen a lot of great performances out of Late Young in the kind of latter half of the season following Elsa's retirement. And we have a very strong support line, led, in my opinion, by Monk, who is arguably the best rookie flex support in the league and one of the top rookies this season. But I think the big issue that I have with Chengdu is just that they seem to kind of only have the one type of style that they succeed at. It's not like the Chengdu of old where they could only run Among on Wrecking Ball, and that was literally the only thing they were capable of doing. They can run more compositions now. Gaga is a very flexible main tank. He can run the Wrecking Ball. He can run the Arisa. He can run the Winston. He can run the Reinhardt. You have more options than you had in the past. But they seem to really only be an elite level team when they can put Jinmu on the Pharah. They can put Leave on something like the Tracer or the Hanzo, and just let kind of Leave play this kind of carry type of role with Jinmu just raining down rockets. They don't have the same level of kind of flexibility, I think, that we've seen some of the other teams play. Like they don't, I think, look all that great when they play Sombra, right? Leave Sombra is not very good. Jinmu is their best Sombra, and I think Jinmu is at his best when he can play something like Pharah or Genji. And so to me, this is a team in a very interesting spot where when they can play the compositions they are comfortable on, they are easily one of the best teams in the league. They are easily an elite level team. They could beat pretty much anybody. But I don't know if the meta is going to favor them as much. We saw a shift away from the Wrecking Ball in the Countdown Cup, which gives me a little bit more worry because I think when we get to Arisa compositions, I think those start to favor some of the Western region teams a little bit more. And so I get a little bit concerned about Chengdu because I don't think they'll be able to play their best looks to the most, kind of to the highest level of success. But I do feel confident in their abilities to find wins, especially this latter half of the season. They have been a very good team. And so I still think that they are a top level team. So I have them here at number 4. At number 3, I have a team that may be a bit of a surprise to some people. I have the Dallas Fuel. Yes, I don't think the Dallas Fuel are the best team coming out of the Western region as we enter the playoffs. And it really comes down to, in my opinion, the fact that the meta seems to be going in the direction of Arisa. And I don't really feel confident in the Dallas Fuel if that is the meta that we see them in. The big benefit the Dallas Fuel have now going into the playoffs that they didn't have for most of the season is a hit scan player. Pine is finally able to be with the team. He is finally with the team. They have several weeks now to work Pine into the roster because they haven't played a match, and they don't play in the play-in tournament, so they have a lot of time to integrate Pine realistically into this roster. I don't think Pine will play all the time. I think Pine will play when they need that kind of hit scan, so they can run the Widowmaker or the Ashe, or they can have Cowboy played in there. So it's a very good thing to see. They have this boost to their roster. But really, at the end of the day, my concern for this team at this point in time is, will they be able to find success on the Winston compositions and the Reinhardt compositions? I think they're better than any team when it comes to playing Winston especially, and I think they're one of the best when it comes to playing Reinhardt. But Reinhardt did not look very good in the Countdown Cup. I kind of expect that to be a similar thing, though we have Lucio back in the pool, so I think that helps them out as well. And Winston found some success, but not as much success as heroes like Wrecking Ball and Arisa. I still think the Dallas Fuel are incredibly talented, and I think that we should still look at them as one of the best teams in the league. but I'm a little hesitant to say that they are top 2 going into the playoffs just because we don't really know what to expect, and I don't think they're a meta-proof team like some of the other teams in the league are. They'll run their style, they'll find success no matter what. They have to run, they'll run the Winston compositions even if other teams aren't, and they'll make it work as best as they can. But I just don't think they are right now the best team coming out of the Western region, and so for me, I have them here at number 3. That, of course, means that the team I do have as the best team coming out of the Western region is the LA Gladiators, who I have here at number 2. Coming off the Countdown Cup win, you have to feel pretty confident about the Gladiators. Yes, they were pushed to the limits by the Chengdu Hunters in both of their matches, but they were very dominant when they played against the the Atlanta Reign, and we saw them have a good win against San Francisco Shock in the regional knockouts. So we're seeing the Gladiators win some of these big matches. We've seen the Gladiators, other than that match against the Paris Eternal, they have been a very good team at kind of keeping themselves in games, keeping themselves from kind of losing their mental state. They've been very good about kind of being a controlled team. I think a lot of that comes down to Space, who I think is a fantastic leader for this team. I think it does a great job kind of doing that job of being like, hey guys, take a step back, let's think, let's take a breath, let's think about where we are, and then we can kind of move from there. It has been the thing that I've been most impressed by with him this season. I just think his leadership is one of his strongest traits. And so when I look at this team, I think they're incredibly talented, and they're very flexible. They can run a very good support line. If they need to have Brig, they have Skewed, who's a great Brig. If they need to Brig Lucio, though, at the same time, Moth can run both of those. If they want to be able to run Bap Zen, they can do that because they have Shu and Skewed, who can both play those flex support type of heroes. And so that flexibility, to me, opens them up to be good on pretty much any composition. I feel good about Muse on all of the main tanks, feel good about Space on all of the off tanks. Kevster has been incredibly dominant this season. Birdring has been elite at times throughout the season. I think he's been not hitting the same highs we saw from him last season, where he was really, really good. Some of that, I think, just comes to how good Kevster has been. And then you have Mir, who can fill in some of the other holes as well. Your Pharah, stuff like that, where he's also very, very good on those heroes. They're a flexible team. They can play pretty much anything. They have momentum going in their favor right now, having just won the Countdown Cup. They are one of the top seeds in the playoffs. I think they are in a pretty good position as we get to the end of the season, as we get into the playoffs, to make a potential run at the title. I think there's a lot of people who question whether or not they can get to that point, when they have to compete against the likes of Dallas and the likes of the Shanghai Dragons, but I still feel very confident in this Gladiators team, and I have them as number 2 overall in my power rankings for that very reason. Finally, at number 1, I don't think this should be a surprise to anybody, I have the Shanghai Dragons. Yes, they didn't make the Countdown Cup. Yes, they kind of took their foot off the gas this past month, but I think that's fine when you're a team that has guaranteed the number 1 spot in the playoffs. No one can catch up to you, no one can pass you. You can take your time, and you can focus on being a top-level team in the league, and you can focus on the playoffs, which is what matters the most. And that's where I think Shanghai really kind of went full in. Now, there is obviously precedent for teams to kind of struggle when they do that. New York did that in 2018. But I think that was more that the team just was not suited to play in the meta that the playoffs ended up being, as opposed to them just kind of failing to kind of match anything. I don't think the Shanghai Dragons will have that problem. I think with Fate being such a versatile main tank, they can play pretty much anything. We've seen Lip and we've seen Fleta play pretty much anything, and I feel super confident with Lee Jae-gon and Izayaki in the backline making tons of plays, and you have Void, who I still think is one of the best players in the league. To me, this is one of the best teams that we've ever seen in the Overwatch League. They just look so strong, so confident. They look so good at all times in the season. They really do just feel like a different animal. It was the same way last season. They just looked that strong at all times. So I have no concern when it comes to this Dragons team. I don't think there's a meta that I wouldn't favor them in any capacity. I think they're that good. I really think that they are the favorites to win the season. I think they're going to be the champions when all is said and done. I think they're going to win the grand finals. I thought that last season and it didn't come true, but this season I feel like I'm more confident in the chances of that happening. And so, to me, Shanghai Dragons are the number one team in the Overwatch League as we finish the Countdown Cup and set our sights on the playoffs. So that is it for my power rankings. Let's throw up the full list real quick so you can see it. There we have it. Dragons, Gladiators, Fuel, Hunters, Reign, Shock, Dynasty, Outlaws, Fusion, Justice are my top 10. And then Defiant, Excelsior, Spark, Eternal, Uprising, Mayhem, Charge, Spitfire, Titans, and Valiant are my bottom 10. So that is it for this time. On Friday, I will do my predictions for the play-in tournament. So we'll have that to look forward to. But that is all for me for today. If you enjoyed the video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. And like I said at the beginning of the video, comment down below your thoughts on my rankings. If you agree, you disagree, whatever it is, let me know down below. That's going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.